Uno, dos, tres, probando.
Hola,
Uno,
hola.
dos, tres, probando.
Muy buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Buenas tardes a todas las personas que están en línea. Les agradecemos mucho su presencia esta tarde. Está en esta sala en Washington, D.C., el Pleno de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos. Y el objetivo de esta rueda de prensa es poder conversar sobre los acontecimientos ocurridos en Venezuela y el trabajo de monitoreo que ha hecho la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos. El segundo objetivo es también cumplir la palabra de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos de no normalizar la crisis, poder dialogar sobre la crisis en distintos momentos y no dejar caer la conversación.
Let the conversation in this regard move to the rear ground. We have the full commission presided over by President Roberta Clark. Also here is the country rapporteur, Ms. Gloria Monique Demis, and the first Vice President of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, Carlos Bernal Pulido. The second Vice President of the Inter-American Commission, Jose Luis Caballero. Commissioner Estuardo Ralón is also here, as well as Commissioner Arif Bokan. And Commissioner Andrea Pochak will soon be joining this conversation, is also joining this conversation. So we have the full commission and the team presided over by Maria Claudia Pulido, who is the Assistant Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights for Monitoring. She is accompanied by Santiago Martinez, who's the coordinator of the Mechanism for Follow-up on Venezuela, and also myself, Tanya Renam, Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. I give the floor first of all to the President of the Commission, to be followed by the Rapporteur for Venezuela, Commissioner Gloria Monique Demis. And all of these conversations will be interpreted for those who are online. I ask that you please, if you need interpretation from English to Spanish or Spanish to English, please click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen, and there you will be able to select interpretation in the language you prefer, English or Spanish. After the remarks by the President and Commissioner Demis, we'll open up a round of Q&A, and after that, we'll give the floor to the journalists who we ask you to please keep your microphone turned off until you are recognized. Thank you. And now, Commissioner President Roberta Clark, you have the floor.
Press conference, which is intended as an exercise of our mandate to bring awareness to human rights issues affecting the peoples of the Americas. Throughout the region, and has closely monitored Venezuela because of patterns of democracy, patterns of attacks on democracy, patterns of attacks related to political persecution, patterns of abuse and repression. Venezuela has been included in Chapter 4B of our annual report for 15 consecutive years. With the deteriorating situation in 2019, the Commission established a special monitoring mechanism for Venezuela, known as Electoral. This is a blatant denial of the political rights of Venezuelans and serves as clear evidence that democracy has been effectively disrupted in that country. To those who may say, well, this is a matter for Venezuelans, we remind that in response to the protests about the failure to release the electoral results, the Venezuelan regime has arbitrarily detained and imprisoned people. Political repression is a reality for those who speak out. As a Human Rights Commission, we cannot overstate the seriousness of this situation. We're not only concerned with the ongoing denial of democratic principles and electoral rules. Nearly 8 million Venezuelans have fled their country as refugees and migrants since 2015. Venezuelan migration is the largest displacement crisis ever seen in our hemisphere. Venezuelans are seeking safety and opportunities for themselves and their families. We ask that the international community continue to demand accountability, continue to insist on the publication of the tally sheets, and continue to call for independent scrutiny of the electoral process. With all these actions, a declaration by the Electoral Council proclaiming Nicolas Maduro's mandate is simply not legitimate. Some of you may ask, why is a human rights body addressing allegations of electoral fraud? Or why is this a matter for the international community? The answer is straightforward. Political rights are human rights. And in democracy, every vote must be indispensable. The region has for decades raised alarms about the undermining of the independence of key institutions, such as the Electoral Council, the Supreme Court of Justice, and the Prosecutor's Office. The lack of transparency surrounding the July 28th election results is an indication of this institutional breakdown. Before I hand the floor to Commissioner Demise, who is the country rapporteur for Venezuela, I want to convey President's solidarity with the Venezuelan people. Let us not forget that more people voted in this election than in previous elections. Second, the actions of the regime in power silences dissent and suppresses critical voices. All of the political prisoners and all those arbitrarily detained should be released immediately. And finally, the Inter-American Commission will continue to monitor and bring awareness to the ongoing human rights crisis and call. And with that, I invite Commissioner Demise, the country rapporteur, to make her statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Gloria Demise, and I serve as the country rapporteur for Venezuela. As my colleague Roberta Clark, chair of the commission, has mentioned, on the 28th of July, 2024, Venezuela held its presidential elections, which saw us served as poll witnesses and observers. However, following the closure of the polls, significant complaints emerged regarding serious irregularities in the transmission of electoral results, as well as a lack of transparency and other obstacles in the citizen audit process. These grave allegations of electoral fraud and irregularities sparked at least 300 spontaneous protests across the country, mobilizing various social sectors, particularly residents from low-income areas. In response, the regime resorted to terror as a tool to suppress the populace and maintain its hold on power. As a result, the protests were met with harsh repression by state forces and armed non-state groups affiliated to the ruling party known as colectivos. This pattern of repression mirrors that observed by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in previous protests, particularly 2014 and 2017, including the arbitrary use of force resulting in loss of life and injuries, arbitrary detention and forced disappearances, judicial prosecution and volunteers, censorship and restrictions on freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, barriers to human rights advocacy. Between the 20th during the protest in 15 and 56 were from low-income areas. From the 28th of July to the 13th of August, civil society organizations documented at least 1,393 detentions, including 182 women, 117 teenagers, 17 people with disabilities, 14 indigenous individuals, and 7 journalists. Notably, the government reported a much higher figure, claiming that 2,000 individuals were detained during the demonstrations. Those detained face criminal charges based on broadly defined offenses that carry excessively harsh penalties. These charges, including incitement to hatred, terrorism, conspiracy, treason, criminal association, resistance to authority, obstruction of roads, and disobedience, are a clear attempt to undermine the exercise of freedom of expression. They also serve to instill a climate of fear, aiming to stifle further protests and dissent. In the context of these criminal proceedings, numerous human rights violations have been reported, particularly violations of judicial guarantees. These include the denial of the right to legal representation of one's choice, with public defenders being imposed, the denial of communication and representation of teenagers by their families, the failure to provide interpretation services and respect intercultural rights of proceedings involving indigenous persons, the denial of reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights is particularly alarmed by the 69 teenagers, including a minor on the autism spectrum, who remain deprived of liberty, detained in connection with the demonstrations. These individuals have been labeled as terrorists by the authorities and have been held in detention facilities alongside adults, often without proper gender segregation. Many have been tried in online proceedings in terrorism courts without the presence of their families or legal guardians. Since the elections of July 28th, human rights defenders have faced increased repression by the state. These individuals are automatically viewed with suspicion by authorities, and their efforts to defend human rights triggers the activation of the regime's repressive mechanisms. At least 36 human rights defenders, journalists, and members of their families have had their, have had their passports annulled without any official notification or explanation from the state regarding the revocation. Between the 28th of July and the 29th of August, 1 month after the election, approximately 130 cases of violations of freedom of expression have been recorded. These include arbitrary detention of at least 13 journalists and media professionals who were unfoundedly accused of incitement to hatred and terrorism. Additional reported actions include the closure and raid of media outlets, harassment of journalists, extensive blocking of websites and communication platforms. Furthermore, confiscating of equipment and the deportation of international press personnel. These actions have led to growing self-censorship and forced many journalists into exile, reflecting a systematic pattern of harassment against journalistic work and an escalation in the criminalization of the right to freedom of expression. All of this is happening within the context of complete impunity, where there is no protection for victims, as state agencies responsible for oversight are controlled by the regime and complicit in its repressive strategy. The main message today, and I reiterate, that the Venezuelan government must end its repression and immediately release all those detained arbitrarily. The Inter-American Commission urges the international community to recognize the gravity of the situation and the chilling effect this repression has had on the Venezuelan population. We call for a coordinated, multilateral, diplomatic effort to support Venezuela's peaceful transition to democracy. Thank you.
Muchas gracias,
Thank you very much, Commissioner Demise. We're now going to offer the floor, but I'd like to recall that the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, Pedro Vaca, is also here, as is the coordinator of the Precautionary Measures Team, Fernanda dos Anjos. I will recognize journalists now, recalling that each journalist can ask one question. So I'd ask that you please raise your hand on Zoom to be able to identify you and then give you the floor.
Muchas gracias, Gabriel.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. You have the floor first, and after Gabriela, we'll take a couple of other questions so that we can have the questions come in. And if you could tell us your name and your media outlet, we'd be most grateful. And you are muted, so we can't hear you. Thank you. My name is Gabriela Sotomayor. I'm a correspondent with the publication Proceso in Mexico, and I am speaking to you from Geneva, Switzerland. And my question is, well, you are talking about the support you're asking for from the international community, and I'd like to know exactly or specifically what do you expect from the government of President-elect Donald Trump with respect to the situation in Venezuela? Thank you. Thank Thank you very much, Gabriela. We now give the floor. I'm sorry, I can't see the screen. If you could put it in gallery mode so that I can identify for the floor.
Thank you for that question. And I think you identified a specific country, but the mandate of the commission is to create awareness of human rights in the Americas and violation of human rights in the Americas. It's not called to report to one specific country or to request from one specific country any action. The Commission reports on human rights and the violation of human rights. And it committed multilateral diplomatic effort to support Venezuela into peaceful transition to democracy, not per se one country, one state in the hemisphere, but the international community. I thank you very much for that question.
Gracias, comisionada.
Thank you, Commissioner. I now recognize Ms. Doricer Alvarado. Hello, good afternoon. I'd like to ask about the issue of political prisoners in Venezuela, particularly about the allegations of torture from the moment of the elections. The number of persons arrested increased. You mentioned the case specifically of minors, but there are also a large number of adults, women and men, who were arrested after July 28th. Do you have documentation of cases of torture against these persons who were arrested after the July 28th elections, who are being held in Venezuelan jails? Thank you.
Gracias, Doricer. ¿Se podría ir?
Thank you, Doricer. Could you please identify the media outlet you're from, please?
Univisión 23 Miami.
Channel 23, Miami. Thank you. I recognize Commissioner Demise.
Thank you also for that question. From our presentation, I indicated that we have documented, and that documentation comes from 393 detentions, of which 182 women, 117 teenagers, 17 people with disabilities, 14 indigenous individuals, and 7 journalists. What I also wish to share with you in terms of the mechanisms of the Commission is that there have been 30 requests for precautionary measures in the post-electoral stage. And we have already granted 16, and 5 were rejected, and there's still a few that are in the evaluation process. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, comisionada Demise.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And also for this question, I would like to give the floor to Commissioner Eduardo Vallejo. for people who have been detained by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Yes, thank you. I would like to add that during the monitoring process that we have conducted
This meeting is being recorded.
and they have been labeled as terrorists by the regime. They have been kept in detention centers for adults, and there hasn't been any distinction in terms of a gender identity. Many of them have been tried in procedures that have to do with terrorism without the presence of any relatives or tutors, without any assistance whatsoever. So this number has been on the rise since the July 28th election, and that is the figure that we have the time being 70 people almost. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. We have 35 media outlets online.
This meeting is being recorded.
They talk to us about the situation of the journalists who are in prison. Has he been able to visit them? Are they how are they feeling? Could you please elaborate on the situation of the journalist? Thank you. Thank you, Gabriela. I will now give the floor to our special rapporteur, Mr. Pedro Vaca. Well, thank you so much for your question. Yes. In the commission, we have been providing information about 30 people who have been detained who are journalists, from which they are about 11 of them are detained now. Several of them have had their hearings, and they have expressed the lack of presence and guarantees, such as attorneys to assist them, and also regarding the conditions of the detention that have been reported, there has not been any kind of frequent contact with the relatives. I would like to also add that the exodus of journalists is remarkable. Many media outlets have had to leave the country, and there is also a high level of self-censorship, and people journalists feel afraid of covering this type of news. So also the conditions in order to pay and a visit are very complicated at the time being. However, this has not prevented us from from receiving information, and we have to acknowledge the work of many civil organizations that who have been documenting the impact on this crisis on human rights. Thank you so much.
Orator especial, le dejo la
Thank you. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Aristóteles Piñeiro and then Carolina Alcalde. Aristóteles, please, you have the floor.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Piñeiro.
This meeting is being recorded.
So with what's happening everywhere with dictatorships, because we are seeing the same situation here. So our concern that this may expand to the whole planet. So our peace is at stake, is in your hands, and we are basically requesting you for help. Thank you so much, Mr. Pinheiro, for bringing up the authoritarianisms and its several manifestations. Now, Carolina Alcalde has the floor. Hi, good afternoon, Carolina Alcalde from the Voice of America from Caracas, Venezuela. I wanted to ask two things. One, what are your estimations regarding my Venezuelan migration that after the elections and now with the situation, uh, this figure may further increase? And the second is, what recommendations, if any, would you like to make to the international community based on human rights in order to pave the way, as you have said, a coordinated action in order to reach a democratic transition in Venezuela? Do you have any recommendation, any concrete action that you may suggest? Thank you. Thank you. We are now going to take the last question from Mr. Reynaldo Mosso so that we can go ahead and answer your questions. Reynaldo, I think you are muted. We cannot hear you.
No le escuchamos, Reina.
We cannot hear you, Reynaldo. Your microphone is muted. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Reynaldo Mosso from Efecto Cocuyo in Venezuela. My question is, at this time, the Commission is working or cooperating with the International Criminal Court. Thank you. Thank you, Reynaldo. I will now give the floor in this phase of conclusions. I will now give the floor to Commissioner Andrea Pochak, who's the Commissioner and the Rapporteur for Human Mobility. Thank you so much for your question about the Venezuelan migrants who have left the country and they are expected to continue living in the country. We're monitoring the people who have been expelled from Venezuela since many years ago. Since 2023, we produced a specific report on refugees and migrants from Venezuela, and we continue to monitor the situation.
This meeting is being recorded.
being able to participate in the elections under the reason of their irregular migration status or a category that does not respond. So yes, we believe that if the situation, the political and institutional situation continues, the situation of the people who have been expelled from Venezuela, unfortunately, will continue. Thank you. Thank you so much, Commissioner. I will now give the floor to Commissioner Timi, the rapporteur for Venezuela.
Also for that actions of the Commission with respect to the International Criminal Court, what I want to share a dossier containing over 100 documents with the International Criminal Court. These are all documents that are public information of the Inter-American Commission with respect to Venezuela as it relates contentious cases, precautionary measures, professional measures, country reports, thematic reports, and press releases. Thank you for your question.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Commissioners, with this last question from Susan Pila, we are going to finish this press conference. Susan? Yes, I apologize, but my camera is not working. I am in Peru. I would like to ask, what is the current status of Venezuela before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, considering the constant rejection of Maduro's government to the Inter-American Charter? Do you, I mean, I, I wonder whether the electoral results have any impact. I will give the floor to Santiago. Thank you so much for your question. The Commission has, every single mechanism is active, and we promote human rights in the Americas in the Caribbean. Now, with regard to the Inter-American Court, the Commission has sent at least 8 cases that will be decided by the court. Thank you, Santiago. With this last question, we are going to conclude this press conference. We would like to thank you to. We'd like to thank all the journalists. This press